On my 70th birthday, my daughter walked in, not with a gift, but with a lawyer. She said she was helping me plan for my future. That same night, I found out she had already moved half of my retirement account. I felt like a stranger inside my own life. I kept quiet. But deep down, something in me was breaking. When a mother becomes a signature instead of a person, what happens next might change everything. I woke up early that morning just as the sky over Maine was starting to soften into blue. The air was quiet, a little too quiet for a birthday. My 70th. A milestone, I had told myself. Something worth honoring even if it was just me and a few bowls of clam chowder. The house still smelled like lemon oil and vanilla. I had scrubbed the kitchen the day before, baked a cake from scratch. Chocolate with raspberry filling. The kind my daughter used to love when she was little. I even set the table with the china that only came out on Thanksgiving. Napkins folded neatly. Candles ready. Everything looked just the way I imagined it would when I pictured celebrating this age with the people I raised. I sat in my spot at the head of the table. Waited. At first it was easy to believe they were running late. A little traffic, maybe a quick stop for balloons. I left the chowder warming on the stove. I kept the cake in the fridge so the frosting wouldn't melt. 1 hour passed. Then 2. The phone stayed silent. I didn't want to check it. I didn't want to see nothing. So I kept busy. Rearranged the silverware, lit the candles just to see how they looked. Checked the oven even though it was off. I glanced at the clock above the stove. 4:12 p.m. Still no knock on the door. Still no messages. I finally sat back down. The room had grown dim without me noticing. I looked at the photos on the mantel. My husband Harold, holding baby Lana in his arms. Her hair was the same color as the frosting I made. She used to sit on the counter while I cooked, talked a mile a minute. I lit a match and lit one candle on the cake. Just one. 70 felt like too many. Then I whispered a wish into the empty room. Please, just one honest moment. That's all. I took a bite of the cake. It was good, soft and rich, but it stuck in my throat. Not because of the texture, because of what wasn't there. At 9:27 that night, I finally checked my phone. One message from Lana. Happy birthday, Mum. Today was really long. I'll swing by tomorrow. And one more line. Casual. Almost careless. We need to talk about the IRA paperwork. Some things are moving ahead. That was it. No mention of the dinner. No question about how I spent the day. No picture of the grandkids in party hats. Just the tone of someone managing a file. I remember staring at those words for a long time. My eyes burned. But I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger yet. Only something small and sharp pressing behind my ribs. If you've ever celebrated alone, while the people you love acted like you weren't even real anymore, then you might understand what I felt in that moment. And if you don't, just wait. It gets colder. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness behind my eyes, not from sleep, just weight. Emotional weight that sat on my chest like damp wool. The cake was still in the fridge. The soup had gone cold on the stove. I dumped both into the trash without tasting either again. The house felt stale. I opened the kitchen window just a crack. Outside, frost had gathered along the edges of the bird bath. It reminded me of birthdays past, when Harold used to bring home yellow tulips from the market, even when snow lined the drive. He never forgot the small things. I sat down with a cup of lukewarm coffee and opened my laptop. If Lana was talking about the IRA, I needed to understand what she meant. I didn't like feeling unsure. So I logged into my retirement account. It had been a while since I checked it. The balance looked off. I blinked, refreshed the page. It still looked wrong. I opened the transaction history, A withdrawal had been made just over 2 weeks ago. A large one. $52,000, labeled as an early distribution. I stared at the number. My heart beat faster. I hadn't touched the account in months. I hadn't signed anything. I would have remembered that. I clicked through to the Permissions tab. Lana's name was still listed under Authorized Access. Durable power of attorney assigned when Harold was first diagnosed. I had never cancelled it after he passed. We were all still grieving, and I thought keeping things simple was best. I called the help desk, waited through a long list of menu options. When a woman finally answered, I asked to confirm who made the withdrawal. She said the authorized representative had submitted it through the financial portal. Secure and verified. I hung up. My hand trembled slightly as I placed the phone on the counter. Lana hadn't asked, hadn't told me, just acted. I stood still for a while, unsure what to do next. It was like finding a broken window in a room you hadn't entered in years. You don't know when the damage happened. You just know it's cold. I pulled out a folder from the cabinet under the stairs. It held all our old documents, insurance, medical, mortgage papers, and power of attorney forms. My name in blue ink. Lana's signature beside mine. No expiration date. I reread the fine print. Full control of financial matters in the event of mental or physical decline. But I was neither confused nor incapable. I had simply trusted too much and checked too little. Later that afternoon, Lana sent another message. She said she would stop by the next day with someone from her work, someone who could help with future planning. That's how she worded it. Polite, professional, like she was doing me a favor. I didn't respond. I sat at the table where I had waited the night before. The flowers were wilting now. I leaned back, folded my hands, and tried to piece things together. Lana had taken money, quietly, framed it as help. And now she was bringing someone else into my home, not for celebration, not for care, but for control. The next day was no longer about cake or catching up. It was going to be about choices, hers and mine. The doorbell rang at 10:08 the next morning. I had been expecting Lana, but not quite like this. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, mid-30s, buttoned-up shirt, polished shoes, the kind of person who rehearses his smile before walking into a room. Lana didn't hug me. She walked in like she had something to manage. "Mum, this is Eric. He's a care coordinator. He specializes in long-term planning." I stepped aside and let them in. The kitchen was clean, no trace of the birthday that never happened. I had cleared it all away. Eric opened his laptop as soon as he sat down. He didn't make small talk, just launched into a presentation about aging with dignity, the benefits of residential support communities, and how planning early could help me avoid confusion later. Lana nodded along as if we had discussed this before. Eric handed me a folder. Inside was a care directive, pre-filled with my name, date of birth, and a list of services. Weekly medication support, nutritional oversight, routine assessments. The language was soft, soothing, but each page carried something heavier. Consent, waivers, transfers of authority. I flipped to the back, a signature line, mine, and below it a notary section, already stamped. I hadn't even touched a pen. I closed the folder. Lana. When was this prepared? Her eyes didn't blink, just rested on mine like she was waiting for me to behave. It's just a formality. Eric brought the documents by to get ahead of things. You've mentioned how tired you've been. We just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed, that your finances and care are structured. I stared at her and something in me shifted. It wasn't tiredness she saw. It was opportunity. I asked Eric to give us a minute. He stepped outside without protest. Lana stayed seated. I reached for the folder again, turned it over in my lap. My voice stayed calm. You moved $52,000 without asking. Now you bring someone into my home with a plan I never agreed to. That's not care. That's control. Lana's mouth tightened. She looked away for a second, then spoke low. You forget things, Mum. You've called me twice in the same hour. You left the oven on last month. I'm doing what's best for everyone. Before things get worse. I remembered both of those moments. I had called her because I couldn't remember if she said Tuesday or Thursday. The oven had been left on, but I caught it in time. Ordinary slips, nothing more. But now they were a foundation, one she could build a case on. I stood up. I'm not signing anything today. Lana rose too. Her voice had lost its softness. You're being paranoid. This is for your benefit. If you keep resisting, you could lose access to the very things keeping you afloat. And then she left, the folder still in my hands. After they were gone, I sat on the couch folder beside me, unopened again. I walked to the cabinet in the hallway where Harold's old tax files were stored. I found the envelope where I kept my copies of all legal documents, one for the will, one for the house, and one for my medical directives. I opened it. The signature was mine. The form was familiar, but something was off. The text looked newer, cleaner than I remembered. And then I saw the date, 3 weeks ago. Someone had submitted a replacement document. My name, my birth date. But the signature wasn't quite right, slightly slanted, the loop in the J too short, and the witness signature beside it was Lana's. My stomach turned. Not only had she accessed my money, she had replaced my voice. This wasn't just about care. It was about erasing me from my own decisions. I stared at that paper and knew something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't safe in the version of the future my daughter had written for me. And if I didn't act soon, that future would become law. The next day, I drove myself to the library, not the big one in town with the computer stations and children's story hours. I went to the small branch tucked between the bakery and the post office, the one where the walls still smelled like paper and dust. I hadn't been there since Harold passed. I signed in quietly and asked the woman at the desk if she could help me print public legal records. I gave her Lana's full name and waited. Within minutes, she pulled up several filings. I asked for 2 to be printed. One was a power of attorney revision dated 2 weeks before my birthday. The other was a medical directive filed through an online platform used by hospitals statewide. I thanked her and took the pages to a corner table. My hands were steady now. I wasn't confused or emotional. I was gathering facts. The revision forms had checkboxes selected for financial authority, medical control, and access to retirement holdings. None of the boxes had my handwriting. But Lana's name appeared throughout as representative custodian decision-maker. I folded the pages, placed them in my tote bag, and walked out into the sharp November air. Back at home, I dug through Harold's old desk in the guest room. The bottom drawer held our tax returns and handwritten notes from his final years. I found a manila envelope labeled family in his script. Inside were copies of all legal authorizations we had made together. The original durable power of attorney form, dated 7 years earlier, gave Lana limited oversight, but nothing close to what I was seeing now. There was also a note Harold had written on lined paper tucked inside a blank greeting card. He had scribbled a reminder to himself. Keep Jan's IRA under joint review. Never give full access without discussion. It wasn't legal, but it told me what his intent had been. I sat on the edge of the bed with that card in my lap. The room was still. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older, sharper, not just because of age, but awareness. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't misremembering. That evening, I called my old friend Louise. She used to work in hospital administration before she retired. I told her I needed the name of a patient advocate with experience in elder rights. Not for myself, I told her, but for someone else who needed to untangle things quietly. Louise didn't press. She gave me two names. I wrote them down, folded the paper twice, and slipped it into my planner under a blank page. Later that night, I sat down with a fresh notebook. I drew a line down the middle of the first page. On one side, I wrote what I knew: dates, dollar amounts, form names, names of witnesses. On the other side, I wrote what I suspected: motives, gaps in memory, shifts in tone. Lana's sudden insistence on stepping in more forcefully right after Harold's anniversary, her change in career field, the gentle press toward assisted care. I didn't write with panic. I wrote with precision. When the list was done, I closed the notebook and slid it into a drawer under my bed. I would not let this turn into a shouting match. I would not become the emotional, aging mother who couldn't be trusted with her own story. Lana was playing a long game, but so was I. And now I had a map. The following morning, I called one of the names Louise had given me. Her name was Amanda Rooks, and she answered the phone on the second ring. Her voice was calm, clipped, and kind. She didn't ask for a long explanation. She only asked for facts. I gave her the dates, the names, the amounts withdrawn, and the documents I had reviewed. She said she would schedule a quiet consult for the next afternoon off the books. No commitments, just clarity. At 3:30 the next day, we met in a corner booth of a diner 2 towns over. Amanda had a leather portfolio and a coffee that she barely touched. I slid the folder across the table. She opened it and studied the signatures without saying much. After a long pause, she looked up and said one word: layered. Lana hadn't just altered one document. She had structured it like a sequence: a financial update, a medical declaration, a durable power of attorney revision, each building on the one before. Together they created the illusion of a decline: quiet, legal, and completely fabricated. Amanda asked me if I had spoken with a forensic handwriting expert. I hadn't. She made a note and told me she would arrange a discreet review. Then she handed back the folder, but not before slipping one sheet inside. It was a checklist: lines for account reviews, document verifications, timelines. When I got home, I went straight to the hallway cabinet. That checklist was my assignment now. Over the next week, I made calls every morning. Bank manager, insurance clerk, county records. I asked for reprint statements, notarized copies of anything that had been altered or filed under my name. Some refused at first, but I learned how to ask differently, how to say I was the account holder, how to lean into the quiet authority of someone who still paid her own bills and filed her taxes on time. Each document told me a little more, and slowly a pattern formed. 2 months before my birthday, Lana had called my broker and updated the emergency contact to her work address. 3 weeks after that, she filed for a replacement medical directive, citing concerns about cognitive decline. Then came the request for early distribution from my IRA, followed by the power of attorney refresh with a digital signature. Every step created a breadcrumb trail of false concern. To anyone outside, it looked like she was stepping in for a mother fading too quickly. But I hadn't faded. I had been pushed. By the end of the week, I had everything Amanda needed. I sent the file through her secure portal and waited. In the meantime, I did something else. I pulled out my old house deed, the one Harold and I signed when we first moved in. I called the county clerk and confirmed that no lien had been placed, no ownership changes made. The house was still entirely mine. And then I called an estate attorney. His name was Victor Ayers. He had a firm grip, a lined face, and the look of someone who had written more wills than wedding vows. I told him I wanted to update my estate documents, not out of spite, but out of protection. We worked through the language together. I added specific clauses. No secondary control without two independent medical evaluations. No disbursement of retirement funds unless signed in ink in my presence. And a clause that froze access to my accounts should any power of attorney be contested. Victor didn't ask many personal questions, but at the end, he said something that stayed with me. Quiet strength is still strength. When he left, I sat on the porch, wrapped in Harold's old flannel jacket. I looked out at the birch trees, their leaves falling in sheets. The world was changing again. But this time, I wasn't letting anyone write my future in my place. That Sunday morning, I put on my beige wool coat, the one I hadn't worn since Harold's funeral. The air outside was sharp and smelled like burnt leaves and cold earth. I took my time getting to the church, even though I wasn't going for the service. I was going to see Eleanor. She used to be our neighbor back when we lived closer to town. After her husband passed, she moved into a senior co-op where she handled the finances for a group of retired teachers. She knew systems, knew how people found loopholes. I found her by the coffee table in the fellowship hall. She was stirring sugar into her cup with a hand that didn't shake. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. I told her I needed help checking the electronic access logs for my accounts. She didn't blink. Said she'd bring her laptop by that evening. That night, she sat at my dining table and pulled up tools I didn't even know existed. With a few keystrokes, she showed me timestamps, IP addresses, login histories. Most of them matched my laptop. But one device, a tablet, had accessed my bank twice at 2:11 a.m. 2 weeks before my birthday. Then again at 3:47 p.m. from a public library IP. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I told her I hadn't used a tablet in years. Next, she opened a side-by-side view of the email trails. A password reset had been sent to an alternate email I didn't recognize. We printed it all. I had enough now. The next step had to be careful. On Tuesday, I scheduled a follow-up with Victor, the estate attorney. I asked him to begin the formal dispute process for the forged power of attorney. He advised discretion until the document could be invalidated. That meant acting normal, no sudden moves. So I called Lana. I asked if she wanted to stop by on Saturday for soup. I told her I had found some old photo albums I thought she might want. She agreed. Saturday came. I made the soup. I set the table with 2 bowls, crusty bread, and a little dish of butter. When she walked in, her smile looked too wide. But I mirrored it. We talked about weather, grocery prices, and fall allergies. I slid the album across the table. She opened it slowly, page by page. We lingered over a photo of Harold in his fishing vest, one of Lana as a teenager in the High School Musical. Then I spoke gently. I know about the signatures, Lana. I know about the tablet, the email, the midnight logins. I have copies. Originals. Witnesses. She froze. Her voice turned thin. Mum, this is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to make sure you were taken care of. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. You weren't taking care of me. You were erasing me. I stood up and walked to the drawer near the pantry, pulled out a folder and placed it on the table beside her bowl. Inside were printouts, the new legal clauses Victor helped me add, and a letter from Amanda's office stating the forged documents were under investigation. She didn't open it, just stared at the edge. I let the silence hang there. No need to explain what was already too loud. After a long pause, she left the table soup untouched. I didn't watch her go. I just sat back down and took a bite of bread. It tasted like something honest, like something mine. 3 days passed without a word from Lana. No calls, no texts, no explanations. I spent that time cleaning the house, not out of nervous energy, but as a way to steady myself. I dusted bookshelves that hadn't been touched in years, polished the old banister Harold used to lean against, and emptied the hallway closet of coats no one wore anymore. It was as if I needed the house to reflect the clarity I had finally reclaimed. On Thursday afternoon, Amanda called. She had news. The handwriting analyst had confirmed what I already knew. The signatures on the medical directive and power of attorney were not mine, and the ink used had chemical inconsistencies that placed the documents outside the timeline Lana claimed. Amanda also said that Lana had opened a side custodial account using my social security number. The account was inactive now, but its creation alone showed deliberate intent. Enough, Amanda said, to warrant escalation to civil court. I listened without saying much. When she asked how I felt, I said I felt steady, not vindicated, not angry, just clear. Later that night, I opened the old cedar chest in my bedroom. Inside were decades of letters, photos, and Harold's keepsakes. I pulled out a folder we used to call our quiet plans. It held documents we never talked about in front of the kids. Backup estate directives, a burial plot deed, a savings bond we had never cashed. I took out the bond and looked at the date. July 1989. The summer after Harold lost his brother and decided we should never leave things unspoken again. I slept well that night. No dreams, no racing heart, just stillness. The next morning, Victor's office called. A hearing had been scheduled for the following month. It would determine whether Lana's power of attorney would be officially nullified and whether charges of financial misrepresentation could move forward. I thanked the assistant and wrote the date down on my calendar in red ink, not to remember the confrontation, but to mark the turning point. That weekend, I took a walk through the town square. Leaves crunched under my shoes, and children in puffer jackets chased each other near the bakery. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman fading into the background. I felt like a witness to my own story. On Sunday, Louise stopped by with scones. We didn't talk about the case. Instead, we played a slow game of Scrabble and drank tea from chipped mugs. She won, but just barely. Before she left, she looked at me and said, "You look different." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. It wasn't in my hair or clothes. It was in the way I stood, in the way I didn't flinch when the wind slammed the screen door shut behind her. That evening, I lit a candle and sat with my notebook again. I added a final column beside what I knew and what I suspected. I labeled it what I choose next, and underneath it, I wrote no more shrinking. I closed the book, placed it back in the drawer, and turned off the light. This time, I didn't feel like I was preparing for battle. I felt like I was walking back into my own name. The following Monday, I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't from the court or Amanda's office. It was from Lana. The envelope was thick cream-colored with my name written in her careful script. For a moment, I hesitated to open it. But then I did calmly at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Inside was a letter 4 pages handwritten. No apology, no direct admission. Instead, she filled the pages with her version of events. She spoke of stress pressure and fear that I was losing control of my finances. She wrote that she had only stepped in because she thought she could help before something irreversible happened. She mentioned Harold's passing as a turning point, said it changed her view of responsibility, that she believed it was better to act early than late, that she wished I had trusted her more. There was one line that stayed with me longer than the rest. It read, "You never seemed to realize how fragile things had become." I folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer, not with legal documents or financial papers, but in the drawer where I kept old scarves and cards from Christmases long past. It didn't belong to the world of fact. It belonged to memory, to something I could acknowledge but no longer carry. Later that afternoon, Amanda emailed. The court had accepted the documentation. The hearing date was confirmed. She said Lana's legal team had responded quietly with no intent to challenge the findings. Amanda suggested we finalize the protection measures regardless. Not because Lana was still a threat, but because trust, once fractured, required new guardrails. So I agreed. I signed the updated estate documents with Victor that same week. We added a co-review clause that named an independent fiduciary for any future transactions involving my accounts. I made sure every document required physical presence. No digital signatures, no email approvals. That same day, I visited the Community Foundation downtown. I had an idea that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the night I sat with that notebook. It was time to do something with the rest of what Harold and I had saved. The foundation director was a woman named Mirella. She listened patiently as I explained that I didn't want to leave my legacy tangled in court battles or buried under grief. I wanted it to move, to reach, to mean something. We set up a fund in Harold's name. It would support women over 60 who had been displaced, manipulated, or financially exploited by family. The fund would provide them legal counsel, housing support, and help building financial independence again. I made the first donation quietly. No press, no announcements, just a signature mine this time, and a line that read, "Unrestricted." On the way home, I stopped by the florist. Not to buy a bouquet, but to ask if they still did delivery to the cemetery on Sundays. The girl behind the counter nodded. I filled out a card. It read, "Still here, still steady," and signed it, Janice. That evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, I sat in the backyard with a blanket over my knees. The porch light hadn't come on yet, and the breeze was just cold enough to make me notice my breathing. I thought about all the steps I had taken, quiet, deliberate, without spectacle. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration, not just of assets, but of voice, of presence, of being seen again not as a burden, but as a woman who had never truly disappeared. She had only been paused, and now she was writing forward again. The morning of the hearing, I woke early. I moved slowly through the house, letting the silence hold me. The floors creaked the same way they always had. The kettle whistled low. I drank my tea without rush, then changed into my navy skirt and the cream blouse with the tiny pearl buttons. I wore it to Harold's retirement dinner years ago. It felt right to wear it again. Not out of nostalgia, but because it reminded me of who I had always been beneath the noise. Amanda picked me up at 9 sharp. She didn't bring papers, just a calm presence and a wool coat with big pockets. I appreciated her silence in the car. There was nothing left to rehearse. The courthouse was quiet. Grey walls, dull lighting, a faint hum from the overhead vents. Lana stood across the lobby, near her attorney arms, crossed hair pinned too tightly. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in stature, but in certainty. She didn't greet me. I didn't offer one either. The hearing wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. Amanda presented the documentation clearly. The handwriting analysis, the digital log records, the notarization inconsistencies. The judge, a woman with steady eyes and silver curls, asked a few procedural questions and took long pauses before speaking. She declared the power of attorney null and void. Then she issued a recommendation for further review of the custodial account Lana had opened using my social security number. It wasn't a criminal charge, not yet, but it was public. After the ruling, Lana's lawyer asked to approach us privately. Amanda declined on my behalf. She said all communication going forward would be through the legal channel. Then she turned to me and asked if I wanted to leave through the front or the side exit. I chose the front. Outside, the air was crisp and clear. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly to the car. Amanda didn't say anything until we were a few blocks away. That went exactly as it should have, she said. I nodded. Back home, I didn't collapse into relief. There was no flood of emotion, just a stillness, a kind of settled breath that came from finally being believed. That afternoon, I went to the community centre where Mirella had invited me to speak informally to a small group of women. I hadn't planned to talk about the hearing, but when I stood in front of the folding chairs and saw the faces watching me, lined, expectant, tired, I spoke simply. I told them how easy it was to become invisible in your own life when you're used to holding space for everyone else. I told them that legal power can be taken, but presence once reclaimed stays. There was a quiet moment after I finished. Then one woman clapped, another nodded, and someone in the back whispered I needed that. That night I sat at the dining table with the same folder I had once slid across to Lana. But this time it held something new. A letter from the Community Foundation. They had matched my contribution. Several donors had stepped in after hearing about the fund. It would now cover legal support for over a dozen women next year. The last line of the letter read, "Your quiet has become a voice." I placed the letter next to the old deed from our first house. 2 documents, both proof of ownership, of what I had built and what I now chose to protect. Outside wind moved through the trees like a hush, not of fear, but of reverence. It wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of something that could no longer be undone. A week after the hearing, Lana came by unannounced. It was early afternoon. I was pruning the rose bushes in the side yard, gloves on, clippers in hand. She stood at the gate dressed in black slacks and a wool coat. Her arms folded across her chest like she was still holding something in. She didn't look angry, just unsettled, like she hadn't decided what part she was supposed to play next. I took my time walking over. She asked if she could come inside for a minute. I nodded, but said nothing. I opened the gate and stepped aside, letting her walk ahead of me. I followed her into the kitchen where the light was soft and the smell of lemon oil still lingered from my morning wipe down. She looked around like she hadn't stood in that room hundreds of times before. Her eyes landed on the table, then on the corner shelf where I now kept the framed photo of Harold fishing at Miller's Pond. He looked so peaceful in that photo sleeve's rolled-up sun on his face. He always said the water didn't lie. Lana sat down without waiting for an invitation. She started talking quickly, said she never meant for things to spiral, that she was trying to protect the family's legacy, not steal it, that she didn't think I would understand if she asked, that she'd panicked after Harold died, realizing how exposed everything felt. Then she paused. She looked at me and said, "You're not as fragile as I thought." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I replied, "No, I'm not. And I never was." She nodded slowly as if trying to accept it, but not quite knowing how. She reached into her coat and pulled out a manila envelope. Said it was paperwork she wanted to give back. Originals. Some documents related to the estate, the ones she had tried to transfer into her name before things unraveled. I didn't reach for it. She placed the envelope on the table and slid it forward. I left it where it was. She asked if we could talk again sometime. Maybe with the family present. Maybe not. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply said, "Today is not that day." After she left, I sat in that same chair for a long while. I stared at the envelope but still didn't open it. Instead, I turned to the notebook that lay next to the fruit bowl. I flipped to the last filled page, then wrote a new heading. After the silence. Underneath, I jotted a single line. Such repairs are not meant to be rushed. That evening, I went to Louise's for dinner. She made tomato bisque and cornbread. We ate in her sunroom, the windows fogged at the corners, the radiator clicking softly every few minutes. We didn't talk much, just shared the kind of quiet only old friends understand. Before I left, she handed me a small wooden box with a lid that slid open with a gentle tug. Inside was a brooch, shaped like a tree, its roots coiling down into a silver base. It had belonged to her mother. "You're still growing," she said. "I think she'd want you to have it." I took it, fingers brushing the cool metal, not with ceremony, but with recognition. That night I placed the brooch beside Harold's photo, not to remember pain, but to honor the steady growth that had come from it. And as I turned out the lights and walked down the hallway to bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Whole. Not because everything was healed, but because I no longer needed anything to be perfect, to be at peace. The first snow came late that year. It dusted the tops of the evergreens and softened the edges of the backyard fence. I stood by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands and watched it fall, slow and deliberate. That quiet, white world always reminded me of beginnings, not endings. It had been nearly 2 months since the hearing. Life had settled into a rhythm that was mine again. No unannounced visits, no paperwork to dispute, no backtracking or rehearsing what I might say if confronted. It felt like breathing without having to count the breaths. I spent more time at the community centre sitting in on legal aid sessions and occasionally helping women fill out forms. Some of them were shy. Others walked in already carrying a box of documents and a look that said they were done being quiet. One morning, a woman named Teresa sat beside me after a workshop. She was maybe in her early 60s, soft-spoken but sharp in the eyes. She said she'd read about the fund, that someone told her I was the reason it existed. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded sheet, then pressed it into my hands. It was a thank you note. Inside, she had written a single line in looping script. "Your courage made room for mine." I didn't know what to say. I just held the note close and nodded. Back home, I pulled out a box from the closet labeled Estate Originals. It held old titles, Harold's service papers, insurance records. I slipped Teresa's note inside and sealed it again. Not because I was closing anything, but because I wanted it stored alongside the documents that had once defined my worth in paper terms. That week, I also received a letter from the regional council. They were considering awarding the fund a recognition grant for its role in empowering elder women in legal distress. The nomination had come anonymously. I thought about Mirella Amanda, maybe even one of the foundation board members. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the work was being seen. I declined the public appearance, but I wrote a letter of gratitude and included one of Harold's favorite quotes. "Do the quiet work that outlives noise." In the evenings, I returned to my writing desk. I didn't journal anymore. Instead, I wrote letters I never intended to send. One to Harold, one to Lana, one to myself 10 years ago. Each one began the same way. "You are not invisible." It helped more than I expected. Not to rewrite the past, but to see it from a steadier place. Not every line was graceful. Some were messy, but they were honest. On the last day of the month, I lit a candle on the mantel. Just one. No celebration, no performance, just a small flame warm and flickering beside a framed photo of me and Harold laughing on the cabin porch. I stayed there a long time, watching it burn low. There are moments in life that split you, not in two, but into before and after. This was neither. This was something else entirely. This was the middle that I had once been too afraid to live in. And now I had made it my home. I didn't plan to go to the holiday luncheon at the centre, But Mirella insisted, said the table had my name on it, and the butternut squash soup was worth leaving the house for. So I went. When I arrived, the room buzzed with quiet warmth. No loud music, just the soft clinking of cups, the rustle of coats being shed, and the low murmur of women talking about groceries, grandkids' old recipes. Nothing grand, everything real. I sat at the corner of the long table next to a woman named Joy, who wore a brooch shaped like a fox and smelled faintly of cinnamon. She asked if I came often. I said not as much as I used to, but enough to remember why I needed it. Mirella clinked her spoon against a glass and stood to speak. She thanked the volunteers, the board, and the women who had kept showing up even when it was hard. Then she looked at me, and for a moment I felt the room pause. She said sometimes the biggest change begins quietly, with one woman who refuses to disappear. I didn't need applause. I didn't need the room to look at me. But they did. Not in the way people look at someone for what they've done, but for who they've quietly become. After lunch, Joy handed me a folded napkin with her number written on it. Said she was helping start a new group for women over 60 navigating financial transitions. Asked if I'd consider coming. Not to teach, just to sit. Maybe share a little when the time felt right. I said yes. That night back home, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and listened to the wind, the kind that rustles the trees just enough to remind you you're not alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. Not everything was repaired, not every scar had faded, but I had reclaimed something no one else could define. My place, my voice, my name, and that in the end was enough. If this story spoke to something deep inside you, I hope you'll stay a little longer. These aren't just stories. They are echoes of women who've loved quietly, lost deeply, and risen slowly but surely. If you know someone who's lived a silence like this, share this with her. And if you've walked this path yourself, let me know you're here. Your presence matters. Your voice still counts. Thank you for listening.